Welcome and thanks for tuning in. I'm Lynn Berger, host of Lynn Berger Interviews Remarkable People. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Josh Grisetti. Josh is an actor, a director, an author, and educator. Wow. Thank you, Josh, so much for agreeing to do this today. It's greatly
Yeah,
appreciated.
happy to
So,
be here.
thanks so much. So today we're going to talk about your career and your various roles, your successes, your challenges, and how you got to be where you are today. Take me back to your childhood. I believe it was in Virginia. And
Yeah.
when you knew you wanted to be an actor.
Well, it's pretty straightforward. I was terrible at everything else. I was not the smartest kid in terms of. That's actually unfair to say. It's not that I wasn't smart. I just was not great with sort of school. I was not great with standardized testing, and I just wasn't interested in it. It was hard to sort of get me to focus there. I probably had some version of ADHD or something, but that wasn't really popular when I was a kid, so
Mhm.
so nobody talked about it. And like all good, young boys in that time, probably still today, I don't know. My parents put me in all of these sports things because that's what you do when you have a male child, I guess. And I hated it. I hated being there. I hated the practicing. I hated the games. I was just terrible. And then my sister was doing community theater. When I was a kid, and I looked at what she was doing, and I was like, that seems like more fun. Like, I think I'd rather do that. And of course, as a little kid, you're obsessed. As a little boy, you're in awe of the female of the species. And I thought, well, I can't play sports with any of the girls, but I can hang out with them if I go if I go learn lines and learn how
That's
to sing.
great.
And it's pretty basic, but but if I'm being completely honest, those were the motivators. I was also the class clown, like in school. I loved writing stories and telling jokes. And when I was a kid, I mean, very small kid, doing little performances in the basement, just goofing around. And then I realized, oh, people do that. Like that's a thing people do yeah, publicly, and people even make money doing that. So that started it out. I was probably in middle school when first got the interest, and then by high school, I was going away for the summers to do these intensive, training things in either singing or acting. By senior year, I basically transferred to what is now the University of North Carolina School of the Arts to get a diploma in drama. So my high school diploma was in drama. It was a residential program down there. So that by that point, I was pretty set on it, and I ended up going to college in Boston at the Boston Conservatory, which is now the Boston Conservatory at Berkeley. And then I moved to New York right after that. So that
Wow.
is it.
Well, that was pretty, you were focused very early on, even though the motivators that you can make it a bit comical now, they were there, and it seems to have worked out very, very well for you. So while you were in school, did you feel, were there any doubts or you just were going straight ahead?
There's always doubts on some level because you're constantly told how difficult the industry is.
Mhm.
Well, it's not easy out there, and it's a lot of rejection, and that's all true, and probably truer than I ever imagined it could be, even from someone who had relative success, in the industry. It's still just brutal in a lot of ways, and but at the same time, I was so naive about it. I had this sort of sense of just like, well, it has to work out for somebody, so why shouldn't it be me?
Good for
And
you.
but I think that level of naivete actually served me because I was less in my head about everything when I was young because I was just so wide-eyed
Mm-hmm.
optimistic about my potential career. Once I realized how difficult it was to accomplish and to hang on to as I got older, I was much more heady in my later years than I was at the beginning. And so I feel like that's one of the big lessons I take away from it is like, why not dive in head first? I never had a backup plan. I never, I wasn't one of those people who really advocated for that. And I still don't to some degree. I feel like the business is so hard. If you have a backup plan already in the works, you will pull the trigger on that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's
because
true.
it's just so it's so difficult. If there's it's the path of least resistance. Eventually you'll come to a point where you're like, you know what, I can do this other thing, and I'm just gonna go do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like if you're one of those people like I was at that age, who's just like, I must do this. So
Mm-hmm.
I really couldn't have the safety harness on. I needed to just, I don't know, sort of New York or bust kind of thing. Um, so yeah, but I remember asking a teacher, this is a stupid anecdote, but I've carried it with me all these years. I asked a faculty member at North Carolina School of the Arts. She was the person that everybody looked up to. She was the really hard teacher. She was very rigorous. And at the end of the year, she pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I just want you to know the reason why I was so hard on you this whole year was because I knew you had the potential to really make it, and I wanted to push you as hard as I could." And I thanked her for that. And then I said, "So if you're just being really honest with me, can you?" Um, I don't want to waste my life away trying to chase this thing, but do you really think I could do this? And she said, after having just told me that, she said, besides all the potential sort of talent you possess, um, no one in their right mind would not hire that nose. And I laughed, and but sure enough, she's right. I've played almost exclusively Jewish characters and Europeans, and most of that is thanks to this natural gift that I was
Gotta
given, a
appreciate
blessing
what
and a
you
curse.
have.
But so anyway, so I had a lot of a lot of odd encouragement in an early stage.
Well, it's quite nice. So what were your early years in New York like?
Mm. So I was so lucky. Out of college, I booked this show at the Goodspeed Opera House, which is a really premier regional
Yes,
theater.
I know.
If people don't know it, it's a really great place
Hmm.
to work, really well established, and has a great reputation. And they gave me my first job. They gave me my union card. Right off the bat. And the director there became such a supporter of me. His name is Tony Walton, and people who are diehard theater fans will definitely know who Tony is. Tony, he's won every possible award you can win for costume and set design. And in his later years, he started directing. And Tony, he had been drawing sketches of me before I was even born. Like so many of his costume sketches were on these very tall, thin, lanky European looking characters that he would just sketch with these great noses. I'm going to come back to my nose. And so it was eerie. He would show me pictures of things. He'd be like, "Look, I drew you in 1974," and be like, "That really is me. It looks exactly like me." So there's no wonder that he gravitated toward me. But after that, he gave me my first off-Broadway contract later that same year. So within 6 months of graduating college, I had already done that long run at Goodspeed and had my off-Broadway debut at the Irish Rep in New York. And that, those years are really sort of priceless. I'm still in touch with a lot of those people, a lot of the actors I worked with, a lot of the creative folks that I worked with during those years. So it was really a great time. I mean, not that there weren't struggles, because I also had to deal with how do you survive in between these jobs, and
Hmm.
the same
Hmm.
thing all the actors go through. But I even worked at Ellen's Stardust Diner for
I
a
love
few
that
months.
place.
Well, it's sort of a rite of passage for a lot of people, a lot of great folks. So I wear it as a badge of pride and honor. And I had a great time. I was rewriting lyrics and doing goofy stuff, and I was rewriting lyrics to make them about like chicken fingers and milkshakes. But it's the weird things that you get off on, the little things in life. But no, I had a, it wasn't all sort of rosy at times, but it was a great journey, and I really prized those early years, frankly.
Mm, mm. Well, to remember them and you just kept going straight ahead. I mean, that's great advice for many people.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. And I pushed it a little. I graduated from a musical theater program because I knew I could sing and I wanted to, capitalize on that. And I went into after about a year and a half of doing sort of a lot of regional work and a little off Broadway here and there. I was like, well, I think I want to focus more on just staying in New York, looking
mm-hmm.
more at the Broadway thing because I'm working my way up and making connections, and it feels like it's time to start focusing on that. And I would love to do film and television because so far I had not auditioned for anything in film and TV for a year and a half after school. And my agent at the time said, point blank, they're like, well, you graduated with a musical theater degree. Why would anybody, be interested in you for film or television? And that is a very old school way of looking at the industry, and that has totally, I don't think any agent would say that now, but
Mm-hmm.
they said it then. And what I realized in hindsight was they were not a very powerful agent when it came to film and television. They had a lot of clout in the theater world, but
Mm-hmm.
so when I came and asked them to get me
Mm-hmm.
film and television auditions, I think they saw that as sort of a, a threat of some kind, or an accusation, like you're not able to do, like
Mm-hmm.
they saw it as in a way that I naively did not see it. And eventually, to their credit, the next day they actually called me back and said, hey, that was an inappropriate thing to say. We're sorry. We will try to find more. And then the first this and here's where just luck comes into it. The first TV audition they gave me, it was for a show called The Knights of Prosperity on ABC.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did I book that pilot, but then that pilot got picked up to series. It ran for a year and completely paid off a massive amount of college debt, and really changed my life in a lot of ways, because to get that financial burden off of
Mm-hmm.
my back at an early age was truly life changing. And anybody
Yeah.
who has a substantial amount of college loan debt will know what I'm talking about. So that was big, but that came directly from being sort of ambitious enough and being vocal enough about what I was aiming for to have people, respond to it. That could have gone a different way, but it went a really positive way. So I'm all for just sort of putting it out there into the universe, saying what you need, and getting your team on board to support that. Yeah. So
I agree.
that's the
To your
lesson there.
credit. Yeah, no, that's a great story. That's a wonder. You just knew you needed to do it that way, and there was no other way you were going to do it, and either take it
Yeah.
or leave it, right?
Yeah, and imagine, I mean, looking back again, because that was a life-changing thing to have
Mm-hmm.
happen. Opened a lot of doors for me
Mm-hmm.
after that, and imagining all it took, all of the first sort of pull of that sweater thread was me going into my agent and saying, I think I need to audition more for film and TV. If I had not had the sort of audacity to do that,
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder, would they have even submitted me for that? Would that have, any of that have come to pass? I don't suppose so. So even now the lesson is to, and since then, I've been like, hey, I wrote a screenplay. Would you have your lit department look at this? And I've had lots of hard no's on things. I've asked director friends for something, and they've been like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Whatever it is, like I've pitched a lot of things that have been totally whole cloth rejected. But the point is, occasionally they break
Right.
through.
Right.
So it's just about planting the seeds, and so I advocate that a lot.
Yes, and taking action. That's great. Now, but you're in New York. You did have a long run, right, with some shows.
Well, it depends on how you classify a long run, but for us in theater, anything
Yeah.
over 6 months is
Well,
is
that's what I was classifying. Yes.
yeah, is considered pretty long.
Yeah.
There are the occasional Phantom of the Opera,
Yeah.
Lion King
Right.
thing that I've been doing this for 20 years, and that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for most of us, anything over a few months becomes a pretty long gig. So I did a couple off Broadway shows that ran for about a year. Peter and the Starcatcher and Rent,
Mm-hmm.
and Enter Laughing, which is sort of the thing that put me on the map in New York. That had multiple productions that came and went over several years. So
Hmm.
altogether, it was a pretty long running experience. And then of course the Broadway shows. I did It Should Have Been You, which ran about 6 months
Hmm.
in the summer of 2015, and then Something Rotten. I did the last 6 months of the Broadway production, and
Hmm.
then launched the national tour and was with the tour for a year and a half. So that
Right.
was 2 years of one show, and that's the longest run I've ever done. And
Hmm.
that's probably the longest run I should ever do. Like my brain doesn't. Yeah, at a certain point, the words become like I've said these too many times. Like I don't even know. It's like my mouth is moving. I don't. Am I still in the story? I don't. There's a mind game that happens, and there's a million little tricks to try to keep your head in it. And uh, ultimately I did okay with it, but it's not my favorite thing. Like after about a year, I think that's a nice round number to stop on.
And
Yeah.
then you went into directing, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I had done some directing in college, so I was always interested in it. But professionally, acting has taken all of my time
Hmm.
and focus, which has been great. But
Hmm.
when I moved to LA after the tour of Something Rotten, um, some opportunities just sort of presented themselves here on the West Coast, mainly to direct shows that I had done in New York, which is a very popular thing to do in the regional community, because they know people coming in who have spent a lot of time with these shows. They know the shows very well. They can get them on their feet in a short amount of time.
Hmm.
So I directed Something Rotten here in LA. And I directed It Should Have Been You, which is the other show I did in New York. So I've had and I loved it. I, I loved getting back to that because it's been a long time since I've directed. But no, I really have a passion for it. I was always like, I wouldn't say I was a side seat director, but when directors gave me space to be part of that conversation, I was never shy about it.
You're natural.
I was yeah, well, yeah. But yeah, a blessing and a curse depending on the director and the circumstances. But yeah, so it was fun to get back to that.
Great, great. Now I'd love to take a little bit of a detour to your book.
I mean, the short of it is, I had a it, it's a spiritual memoir. That's how I try to articulate it. It's sort of my spiritual journey, which is very bizarre, acknowledged bizarre. And I grew up very conservative Christian, as most people do in the South, um, part of the country. And as I got older and as I was working in theater, I realized, oh, there's some tenets of this faith that don't quite make sense to me and are highly problematic.
Mhm.
There's a lot of unanswered questions about suffering and the nature of things, and that I don't know that the Bible particularly does a great job at explaining, and at least not if you're looking in the wrong places in it. And then I saw it, so it sort of completely unraveled. I became sort of an angry agnostic, I guess is how you'd say it. Uh, and then in that period of my life, when I was in that sort of space, I had this accidental drug overdose at a dentist's office, which sounds so silly. But I had a huge dental phobia, and the book also covers the dental phobia, why that came about. It was
Mhm.
some traumatic childhood events, as you can imagine, and so I self-medicated way too much, and then the dentist gave me all kinds of other chemicals, and then at the end of it, I ended up having this massive hallucination. And so, anyway, I came out of this experience totally sort of like Ebenezer Scrooge. I didn't become like, I wasn't evangelical or anything about it, but I had a whole different view of spirituality after that. And I told people about it, my friends and stuff. And then somebody at some point, a friend of my parents who were still devoutly Southern Baptist, gave me this book called Heaven is for Real. And it's about a kid who saw God in a similar state of anesthesia that went sort of awry, and his parents wrote it all down as like proof of
Mhm.
God exists,
Mhm.
But his parents were conservative Christians. His father was a pastor,
Oh.
and his father was the one writing the book. So you can imagine it was a pretty specific narrative. And I was like, well, that's not I was like, I had an experience like that too, but I'm not out here writing books about it and, and tell people. And I was like, oh my God, I should write a book about this. And it was really a counterpoint to be like, well, if we're all just sharing what we saw as proof of something, okay, well, here's what I saw. But the whole point of it was like, it's not about the proof. There is no proof. You can't. Everybody's going to see what they're going to see, and everybody would have a different experience if they had that type of experience at all. So it's sort of trying to give a counterpoint to those types of books. That's what that's what I really wrote it for. But it's called God in My Head. And if anybody's interested in that type of stuff, has nothing to do with theater. I don't even mention that I'm an actor, because I knew that if I did, it would become a book sort of about that, because it's such a specific vocation. So they are completely separate. So if you're interested in theater, that's not going to be the fun book to read. But if you're interested in spirituality and those thoughts and progressive sort of Christianity and whatever, then it'll be a fun book to read. Well, I self-published it. We tried to have it legitimately published, as you always want to do, but everybody came back with the same thing. They said everybody loved the narrative, the voice. People kept saying your voice is so clear and so specific and unique, and we love that. But there's no demographic for this book as far as sales go, because if you're a devout Christian, you'll hate it, because it's challenging a lot of Christianity. If you are sort of an atheist or someone who's spiritual but not religious at all, it's far too religious for you. Like, so it's threading a needle of who wants to read this, because it's going to be people who grew up with Christianity but have fallen away from it, or people who like Christianity on some level but find it very problematic and want to find an alternative viewpoint for it or whatever. And they're just like, and those people don't read one thing, they don't visit one website, they don't go to one church, they're spread out. There's no way to find them. So that was the consistent feedback we got. So I just self-published it, but then it actually did very well. It rose up and hit the #1 spot like 4 or 5 times on in the spirituality sort of religious psychology section of Amazon, and then that got the attention of a publisher that eventually did pick it up, and then they turned it into an audio book. So there's an audio version of it that they made. So now it is published. So it's a really rare sort of breed that that started self-published and then became published. but there it is. So for whatever it's worth, but it did really, it did better than I thought it would. So
yeah, I wanted you to share that. And in our last few minutes, you became an educator. There's so much here, Josh. We could talk for an hour. But
we could.
Tell me about what motivated you to take that on, and how I think it's going to begin for you. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been teaching for the last couple of years at the college level, and the truth is, I have always wanted to teach at the college level. Like even when I was very young, like in high school and college, I was like, oh, this is I like this environment of creativity, of fostering young artists, but I also, from my perspective as a student of the arts, I had a very hard time trusting teachers who had never had careers, who had never put these concepts into actual practice and proven that they work. And that is both right and wrong of me to have thought, because I think there are some people who are put on this earth strictly to teach, and they weren't put into the shoes they're wearing to perform necessarily. So there's something to be said about that. But for me, I knew if I taught, I wanted to have that background. I wanted to have a resume that I could point to and be like, look, here's all the stuff that I accomplished with these very principles that I'm trying to convey to you. So I know that there's a potential for them to work. They're not strictly theoretical. I didn't pull these out of books and things. So that was important to me. So I knew that was going to take time to do. And then I kind of just forgot about it as I trudged ahead in creating that resume and building that career. And it wasn't until really the pandemic happened, really? where it shut everything down, and it was like, well, what else is there? You know what I mean? And I came back to, well, I always liked this idea, and let me try it out. And then I've just loved it, You know, I've had such a great time working with these students and watching them progress and seeing how quickly it can happen sometimes. Like a student comes in just a mess on day one, and by the end of, 3 months later, they're in a totally different place. Not every student, but enough to make it really sort of inspiring to witness. And so then a lot of the rest of it was just sort of happenstance. It just came up that a major university with a major musical theater program right here in Los Angeles needed a new head for their musical theater program, and they specifically wanted somebody who had Broadway and/or national tour credits. And I was like, well, we jived really well through the interview process, and there's a lot of potential there. And so they hired me along with this other great guy, Marty Austin Lamar, who was the head of the BFA musical theater program at Howard University in DC. And together, he comes with a lot more music and academic background. I come with sort of the acting,
Mm-hmm.
musical theater industry background. And together, I think we make a pretty great team. We've been working together all summer to get ready for this fall to start the process of launching basically a new version of the program that they've had there for a while. So this is at Cal State Fullerton. And it's one of the only BFA programs for musical theater in all of really most of the West Coast, but certainly all of California. Most of those programs reside more on the East Coast. So there's a real potential here to create sort of a really well-known, thriving musical theater program. I'm pushing 40 now. Like I'm sort of at a turning point in terms of life seasons and chapters. And I've been the gig worker for 20 some years, and it's been great and exciting and lots of ups and downs, but there is something really appealing about, okay, I've paid those dues, and now it's time to sit back a little bit on that and plant some roots somewhere. And
With the
it's not that I'm
schedule.
gonna yeah,
Yeah.
it's not that I'm going to stop
Yeah.
performing it,
Right.
but I'll probably focus. And the reason I moved to LA was to focus more on television and film and commercial. And so the teaching thing makes it a little more palatable to do those things. So
Mm-hmm.
it probably means I'm taking a step back from theater as much as I have been in the past 20 years. And it'll probably be more like regional shows in the summer and stuff rather than big Broadway shows. But I think, again, I've done all of those things. I checked those boxes, and it's
Good for you.
time to move
Yeah.
on.
No, it sounds great. I mean, different periods in your life, you got different things done, and it sounds like a great plan. So
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much. It was so rich with, so many different people with different interests are going to get something out of this
Mm.
conversation. So have a wonderful day, and it was wonderful to meet you, and thank you once again.
Pleasure to meet you, Lynn. Thank you so much for having
Thank
me.
you.